Welcome to this explainer. We all eat, right? But I bet very few of us actually think about the massive hidden industrial machine that gets that food onto our plates. Today, we're uncovering the very real, highly quantifiable risks lurking right behind our global food supply chain.
So, how do we actually measure the true cost of our food? Because honestly, it goes way beyond that little price tag at the grocery store. Every single vegetable, every grain of wheat, every bottle of cooking oil, they all carry this massive, invisible footprint. We're talking energy consumption, water usage, greenhouse gas emissions, and human labor. But how in the world do you measure something that complex?
Well, we're going to map it out using the incredibly strict accounting metrics from the SASB Agricultural Products Standard. And here's the kicker. Under this framework, major financial institutions aren't just looking at sustainability as some feel-good PR exercise. No, they treat it as hard, quantifiable risk management. If a company doesn't manage its water, its energy, or its supply chain, it literally hits their financial bottom line. To really wrap our heads around this, we'll take a quick journey down the supply chain. We'll start with the global food ledger, move into sourcing raw materials, look at processing emissions, the water crisis, and wrap up with food safety and protecting the workforce. All right, Section 1, the global food ledger. Let's zoom out and look at how this massive agricultural machine actually functions. Picture this like a giant whiteboard animation tracking the staggering flow of our food. It's definitely not just a local farmer selling at a market. We are talking about massive corporate entities purchasing raw commodities from third-party growers literally all over the globe. They trade these commodities, then conduct value-adding milling and processing, turning raw grain into flour or soybeans into oil. And finally, they handle the wholesale distribution worldwide. It is a highly complex web. Managing risks here is absolutely crucial to keeping raw materials flowing and stopping sudden price spikes. Moving on to Section 2, sourcing the raw materials. Every journey starts at the source, right? So let's look at the literal groundwork. Now, this is where it stops being just about farming and becomes a strict industrial ledger. Companies literally have to quantify their exact scale. They track production by principal crop in metric tons, they tally up the sheer number of processing facilities they run, and they measure the total land area under active production in hectares. And maybe most importantly, they have to account for the massive costs of externally sourced agricultural commodities, because whatever you buy from the outside brings a whole host of risks right to your front door. Think about it. Relying on thousands of third-party farms is incredibly risky. Companies have to disclose exactly how they manage things like extreme weather events, wiping out an entire harvest, or water stress forcing crop regions to shift. They even have to account for pest migration and environmental degradation. And it's not just environmental. They have to track complex human rights and labor conditions right down to the contract grower level. Because a disruption anywhere in this chain can bring a massive food producer to a grinding halt. Okay, Section 3, processing, energy, and emissions. Once those raw crops are harvested, they head straight into the intensely energy-heavy world of milling and processing. Turning raw grain into this tough-in-your-pantry takes vast amounts of power. Because of this, companies are mandated to rigorously track their gross global Scope 1 emissions. Basically, Scope 1 covers the direct greenhouse gas emissions from their own processing facilities, plus the fuel burned by their land or sea freight. All of this has to be measured in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. If a company ignores this, they are totally exposing themselves to future regulatory fines and crazy fuel price swings. And to manage those emissions, these companies have to categorize their total operational energy in gigajoules. They need to break down the exact percentage of power coming from the traditional electrical grid versus renewables like wind, solar, or certified biomass. This kind of transparency is a real game changer because it instantly shows if a company is vulnerable to wild grid electricity prices or if they're actually transitioning to renewables to protect their long-term operating costs. Next up, Section 4, the water crisis risk. Obviously, you can't grow or process food without water, making it one of the most volatile variables we face. Seriously, what actually happens to an industrial milling facility when the local river dries up? To figure this out, companies have to use the World Resources Institute's aqueduct tool to identify how much of their supply chain operates in areas with high or extremely high baseline water stress. This isn't just some vague environmental buzzword. It's a direct operational threat. Being in these zones means higher water bills, tighter government limits, and competing directly with local communities just for basic survival resources. This forces some incredibly strict accounting. They have to measure two distinct things in thousands of cubic meters. First, total water withdrawn. That's the water they pull from lakes, rivers, or city pipes. But second, and this is absolutely crucial, they must track total water consumed. Consumed water is what evaporates during processing or gets baked permanently into the food, meaning it never goes back to the local ecosystem. Tracking that gap, it forces companies to confront their actual permanent drain on local water supplies.
Which brings us to Section 5, Safety on the Line. After all that sourcing, energy, and water, the final product still has to be safe to eat. To keep us safe from dangerous pathogens or chemical contamination, the industry leans on intense safety certifications, like the Global Food Safety Initiative, or GFSI. Companies have to publicly report their audit nonconformance rates. Basically, how often do auditors find major nonconformances, serious risks that need immediate action, versus minor nonconformances? Catching these red flags before the food ever ships is literally a matter of public health. But sometimes things do go wrong, and the financial and reputational hit is massive. Companies have to track the number of recalls and the total metric tons of food recalled. And they have to compare proactive voluntary recalls, where the company catches the issue themselves, against severe involuntary recalls, where government regulators step in and force them to pull it because they violated safety standards. A high rate of forced, involuntary recalls is a huge red flag to investors that a company's internal quality control is broken. Finally, Section 6, protecting the workforce. Because behind every metric we've talked about is a real human being facing occupational hazards. Agriculture and milling are labor-intensive and honestly often dangerous. So companies have to clearly disclose their safety records. We're talking total recordable incident rate, fatality rate, and near-miss frequency rate. But here's the most important part. They have to disclose these numbers for direct, full-time employees and for third-party contract workers. In an industry that heavily uses temp agencies and seasonal labor, forcing this kind of transparency stops companies from hiding their true safety record behind contracted workers. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today, from tracking global Scope 1 emissions and gigajoules of energy, to measuring water stress, to auditing the safety of our food and the workers who make it happen. We've totally unpacked the hidden cost of agriculture. It's a massive ledger of risks and resources, which leaves me with one final question for you. If you could actually see this hidden ledger printed right there on your grocery store receipt, would it change the way you eat? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll catch you next time.